Hello and welcome to the Stacking Dinger Show, your home for everything Underdog, MLB, baseball. That's the redundant Major League Baseball, baseball. I'm a little bit off today. I am coming to you recorded live from Mexico. Been working hard down here. I am Matthew, aka Sheep, aka Dark Sheep. You can check me out on Twitter at D4RKSH33P underscore. I am joined by Nez. You can find him on Twitter at Nez Takes. You can find him almost daily on Badge Bros channel, talking to all things Underdog, all the sports. And tonight we have a special guest, Jarod, who we know as Jay Baconator until tonight. Um, uh, just a brief introduction. Jarod is someone who has actually some experience in Major League Baseball, working for teams. So with that, Jarod, I'll just let you do like a brief introduction as to who you are and maybe what you did.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Sheep, for having me on. Excited to be here. So I spent kind of the last 3 seasons working in the industry. I spent 2 years kind of with one team on the player development side, kind of in the classic entry level role of minor league video. And so my first year served as a minor league video intern, really just kind of helping players and coaches with capturing all the video and data on a daily basis and making sure that all of the kind of tech stuff was taken care of. And then my second season served as the coordinator, which did the exact same thing, but oversaw the rest of the affiliates, and kind of really made sure that players and coaches are all taken care of when it comes to data and video. And as kind of analytics continues to really take a hold on this sport and on this game, being able to have that information readily available for players was very useful, and watching those changes in player development happen in real time. And then this past season, I spent time on the pro scouting side as a pro scouting analyst fellow, where my main task was to kind of keep up to date on prospects, had a list of organizations that kind of fell under my territory, made sure I know the ins and outs, and made sure that I just got reports in and accounted for the landscape that is minor league baseball with its thousands of players.
So that how much of that involved traveling around to different places? Like, uh, were you based out of one place for team? I know we're being a little bit vague tonight, just to not get you into really getting blamed for talking or giving any opinions from teams or whatever. So we're gonna leave a little bit vague. But how much traveling and stuff was involved?
Yeah, so a decent kind of amount of travel, not anything crazy. I think with the first org I was with, I was based out of the spring training complex. So first year didn't have any travel at all, and then the second year I kind of traveled once or twice to each affiliate to check in, make sure things are running smoothly there. And then this past season, while scouting, I spent probably about 20 to 25% of my time on the road. Was based out of the major league front office, and then kind of traveled to various kind of minor league cities to see some series, and then as well to Arizona to catch kind of the rookie ball guys out there.
So when it comes to your history in fantasy, or just what you kind of where we started to overlap. We met you in the Deposit Kingdom Badge Bros channel. You kind of showed up one day. So what's your history then with fantasy?
Yeah, so I've been an avid fantasy player ever since I was little. Have always loved stats and projections and trying, pick the best teams and build the best rosters. So for me, it was mainly kind of fantasy football growing up, and fantasy baseball kind of was secondary to that. And obviously, kind of working in baseball, one of the nice things is that employees weren't restricted to other sports. So I was not allowed to play fantasy baseball for the last few years, but still kind of was very active in fantasy football, and then kind of stumbled across the Underdog platform this past fall. Fell in love with the NFL dailies through a few bulletin and NFL best ball, and then kind of started throwing my hat in the ring in the other sports. Have been really big into golf, which has been a lot of fun. So for me, I've always been an avid fantasy player, and it's nice to kind of get back into it on the baseball side of things.
Did you have any moments working in baseball professionally that kind of took you by surprise that you weren't like expecting when like coming in to the profession that kind of changed your perspective on how teams operate or how like a certain team operates?
Yeah, I think kind of one of the cool things about kind of getting a chance to work directly with coaches and players is I got a chance first to kind of see what was shared with them, what information was distributed, how that information was communicated by coaches. I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of great coaches who really cared about the players that they were working with and were trying to give them every resource possible to get better. And I think one of the things is that some orgs are definitely better than others with how they communicate data, what sort of metrics they value the most, and kind of how they use that information combined with a lot of the biomechanics and what the coaches are seeing. And so I think I definitely was surprised, kind of having the chance to work for multiple teams, just how different things can get from team to team. And I think you see it a lot in the media with how certain teams are portrayed, where it's obvious that the Dodgers are the best of the best at this. They're miles ahead of everyone else with what they're doing. And then there's other teams like the Rockies and the White Sox that are consistently kind of considered being way behind the curve and struggling to catch up. And with friends that were working across various orgs and having conversations about what you're doing and what the job looks like, it's clear that there's definitely still a gulf between the teams. And I know Kyle Bodie, who runs Driveline, has talked a lot about this on Twitter. The gulf between teams is much bigger than you might think.
Do those teams know that, or are they just like oblivious, or are they? I don't know. Like they know it and they don't want to change.
I think it's a mix depending on the organization. I think I honestly don't know because I think every team is reading the media coverage about them. They know what their perception is. They know what's being written about them on Fangraphs, in the Athletic. So they see it and they know that it exists. But I think there's also some sort of hubris that really does apply to front offices where, well, not all the information is public. They're not seeing what we're seeing. They don't know our process. And sometimes that's legitimate because change can take 2 or 3 years to really kind of take hold. Sometimes it's not, and they kind of fail to see the mistakes in their ways and change. And that I think is one of the toughest things in the industry is some orgs are very willing to embrace change, take risks, try out new things as they come up, where other teams are, hey, we have this way, this has been our way for the last decade, and we have no plan of changing it whatsoever.
That's very interesting. It kind of reminds me of, I mean, the Pirates obviously were like under recent fire or whatever you want to call it in the Athletic with a very like scathing article that was really revealing about the disorganization, the dysfunction, and mostly just being like handicapped by an owner. But I still think, kind of like you said, there is still a level of hubris, excuse me, that is involved with this, and almost like seeing as working for somebody like Bob Dudding, for example, is like a challenge where like, yeah, I want to, yeah, I know I'm hamstrung financially, but I still want to get over that hump and like make a name for myself to say, hey, like I did that. And you do have to have a certain level of self confidence, I guess, to say in a nicer way, in order to do that. So yeah, that makes sense what you're saying.
Um, there's kind of also a thought, that working in baseball is like everybody wants to do it. Like, did you feel uh, like pressure to perform, like that sort of stuff, like as just working for a team, like it's obviously you've made it to this glamorous show, so there's glamour involved. But I just mean there's like a prestige to it, even at an entry level position. That like how did that make you feel doing it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm someone who loved kind of the competition and the team and camaraderie aspect. For me, obviously, the goal was to hopefully one day be a GM, and now that kind of has shifted after the years that I kind of spent in the industry. But I think love for baseball is what brought me into wanting to work in baseball, and for me, I wanted to contribute to a World Series however I could. And that was really a huge driving factor of wanting to make an impact in an organization that resulted in a World Series title. Because at the end of the day, I think that's the goal that all 30 teams should be striving for. Obviously, not all 30 are striving for that in any given year, but it's what I think is the most important thing you should be doing every move that you make, with kind of maximizing your contention window and maximizing the chances of winning a World Series, because making the playoffs is hard enough over a 162 game season, a little bit easier now like with the expanded playoffs, but being able to perform in that little sprint at the end, where variance is a huge factor in 5 and 7 game series and three now in the wild card. So it's huge, and being able to just put yourself in a playoff spot consistently, and then just hope for the best once the playoffs roll around.
There's actually kind of interesting parallels between that and the underdog format of baseball season long. I know you said you haven't done a ton of it. You're kind of gearing up for dailies, but you have the long, drawn out season that you have to put together. Advancing team, and then you have those, short term variance filled playoff weeks. So yeah, it sounded like you're sort of passing on that for now.
Yeah, and I think I definitely plan on kind of entering a decent amount of dingers. I'm planning on kind of finishing the drafts kind of as spring training ends and we kind of have a clearer injury picture. But I did max the bunt, and kind of tried to experiment with a bunch of different things there and put together some different strategies. I'm someone who's definitely team never pitcher. I think as we
Okay.
saw, with the Cole injury that's happened recently, I think the way the underdog scoring system is set up, it's really hard to separate as a pitcher, and you have just a multi-factor higher risk of injury, relative to hitters. So I've usually been kind of trying to target pitchers in that kind of round 6 to 10 range. I'll start going after, probably 2 or 3 pitchers there. I really like the arms that are in that ADP range, like Logan Gilbert, Scooball, Grayson. I'm really trying to kind of load up on those guys as my top 2 arms in that range. And Strider's really the only pitcher I think is worth getting early, but I've still just been avoiding it because I'm scared of pitcher injuries. It's what's ingrained into you while working in a front office, because they can be so catastrophic, and you can be out for 12 months at least in the span of one pitch. So I've definitely been hesitant to waste that early draft capital on a pitcher that goes down.
So now, where are you at these days, Nez, on pitching?
Yeah, no, I'm glad this is the topic of conversation, because obviously with Garrett Cole right now and his injury, it was a huge bummer. I was like at the field on Garrett Cole, but I like the arms that you mentioned, and I think that they have potential to be like elite arms. And so for the most part, I'm loading up in that range, and I feel like they are worthy of, considered high draft capital, so to speak, where I end up like ending with 6 pitchers, but just knowing the attrition that happens throughout the season, I'm trying to focus on getting at least 7 moving forward. You mentioned Strider, and I think Strider sort of represents, in the last like few years in fantasy football, like Travis Kelce, where like you kind of think of like pitching as tight end, where yeah, they don't score as much, but there's this one player in the position that can outscore everybody, and it's him. And Strider has the ability to separate in a big way. Uh, health withstanding and everything. But I think there's some players that can rival him. But for the most part, I think you're likely to see him separate in a big way. Now, obviously, we have 2 start weeks, which are different than anything else as far as fantasy football goes. But the TLDR is I'm trying to get 7 pitchers, and I love that like pick 70 to pick 90 range. I wish I could take 6 arms from that range.
Yeah, I've been all 7 pitchers, and mainly going in that range. And then when I do get to the back end of the draft, I'm either going upside pick that I think will have a ceiling, bounce back arm, or like one of those reliable inning eaters as pick 7, just kind of depending on what my previous 6 pitchers look like.
Yeah, I'm not sure how in tune you are with ADP right now. Is there any like favorite late round pitcher that you're gravitating to more than others at the moment?
Yeah, I think I like Kyle Gibson way more than the field, because he's someone who isn't flashy by any means. I don't really see him as someone with upside. I just really like him rounding out my staff as the 7th pitcher who is probably going to be a good floor play, and in case other pitchers go down, hopefully he stays healthy again this year, but he has a history of being someone who has stayed very healthy, and he's essentially free in the 20th round every time. I think his ADP right now is like 236 or 237, something around there. So he's definitely an arm that I've been trying to target. I just started, after his spring training velo is way up, just started targeting some Jack Flaherty late. I think he is definitely a really good bounce back candidate if the velo is up. And then the steam has been too high on a lot of the guys that I like that were in the 200s during the bunt that are now community sharp. They know what they're doing, that have jumped up into the 170, 180 range. Bayo, Cutter Crawford, Bryce Miller, Brian Wu. So a lot of those arms that I really like. Everyone else also really likes. It's been tough to kind of snag them.
If there's like one thing that you can look for in pitching and like trying to predict fantasy success, I know this is like gonna get you in trouble here, but if there's just like one thing you could boil down when it comes to a pitcher, like what would that one thing be if you were to like try to predict future success, at least for fantasy?
It's vague, but athleticism is my answer there, because I think with athleticism, it's a precursor to 2 things: stuff and command, which obviously you need both to be an elite pitcher. And so I think that's really the main thing that I look for, is guys that are explosive, guys that move very well, that have good pitch mixes, that have feel for the baseball. Obviously, it's what makes a good pitcher, and there are so few guys that have all of that. But just kind of, if you have a few of those traits, where it's like I really love Bryce Miller, because Bryce Miller is a really good athlete that throws really hard, and he's got a unique shape to his fastball. His fastball is thrown from kind of a low release slot, and it gets a ton of ride to it, which makes it pretty deadly at the top of the zone. So little things like that are tough, because you need to kind of watch the video to see it and not just look at the spreadsheet. But I also am someone who believes that projections are super valuable, because there's so much data that exists in baseball, and the biggest way to beat the projections is just being able to identify changes that players make before they've used it in games enough for the projection system to take hold of it.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question, was like, where do you come from your perspective on projections? Have you used any like total like underdog point totals, or are you more looking at like rate type projections?
Yeah, so I know he was on the show probably like a month ago now, but using Derek Carty's projections for sure, um, especially for hitters with the Bat X. I'm someone who like knows that you need to have Statcast data and batted ball data in your model for hitters to really have the most accurate projection set that you can. And the way that he does his projections is very similar to how teams build their own internal offensive projections. So for me, that's kind of been the main source of my rankings for hitters.
Good. Um, he'll be happy to hear that. um, so my later round pitcher had been Taj Bradley. Obviously, that seems to have blown up a little bit. Have I missed any other pitcher injuries in the last few days, being away from the Garrett Cole and Taj Bradley?
I think that's those are the big ones. The latest on Senga has been vaguely positive, so there's that. I think. Well, let me just ask the guest here: if you were to choose, I guess maybe health / just like fantasy outlook between Bradish and Senga, who would you kind of veer towards being more, positive towards based on their respective injuries?
I think injury wise, I think Bradish's might be a little bit more concerning to me, just because it's an elbow injury and there is some damage to the UCL itself, which oftentimes can heal without surgery. And I think Aaron Nola is a really like one of the most prominent examples of that kind of injury where he had an elbow injury, didn't get surgery, and then he's been healthy for the next 7 or 8 years since that's happened. So I think it's definitely the elbow worries me, but I think for this season particularly, I think Bradish is probably going to be out a couple of months. Shoulders are scary too with Senga, especially with Senga being a little bit older than Bradish. I think Senga is approaching 30 now. Um, and it's always a concern, but based on the way that the Mets have been portraying it, it seems like they're not concerned that it's going to be more than hopefully a month or two.
When it comes to like actual teams, like obviously you work more at the minor level, but maybe you have some insight. Like, how do they think about their rotations? Like, how much do they plan on dipping down in, or is it? I guess maybe it's organization by organization.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things that different organizations prioritize depth differently. One of the things that I figured out very quickly working in a front office was depth, I think, is the most underrated aspect across the industry. Not enough teams were really investing resources into AAA depth that could step up and weather the storm when guys on your major league team get hurt. I think teams are obviously hoping that they never have to go into that depth and that their pitchers can, all throw 160, 170 innings or more and be healthy and make 30 plus starts. But realistically, that's just not how pitching ever works. And so having those kind of quality AAA arms that can kind of step up, whether it's guys that have previous big league experience, guys that, have 4 fringe pitches with fringe command that, just throw enough strikes with just enough nastiness to kind of make it through innings. So I think it's a huge consideration for the smart teams. I know, like the Dodgers place a huge emphasis on it, and they're really interesting because them in Tampa, they target high risk injury pitchers that have, lengthy injury histories, that have all spent, a lot of time on the IL over the course of their career. And they get, 12 to 15 of them. And they hope that 5 or 6 of them stay healthy enough to make it through the season. And you get a discount on that guy's talent because everyone's avoiding them because of the injury history. But you also run the risk that they could throw 0 innings for you because they miss all year with an injury.
Oh,
That's an interesting approach.
you mentioned, getting 170, 180 innings out of pitchers. So obviously, again, this is on a player by player basis, but do you have any insight on the year over year workload type of planning that they do for younger pitchers?
I think that's an area I think that is probably the most variable from org to org. It gets treated very differently, and especially as kind of the science on workload continues to kind of be evolved and researched. You have some teams who are very, systematic of 100 innings their first year, 115 innings their second year, 130 innings their third year, where other teams are more looking at, a lot of the biomechanic data, a lot of the sports performance data of monitoring, fatigue and measures of inflammation and stress, and trying to adapt it based on how a player's body is responding rather than kind of any set number of innings. So it's definitely very variable, team by team, and different types of athletes can withstand, different types of increases. So I think there's definitely going to be a lot of variance in how that's handled.
That makes sense. Do you think there's some trends that could potentially emerge this season, or in the future, that aren't really being talked about at the moment, specifically with pitching?
Yeah, I think the expansion of kind of multi-inning relievers might kind of take off a bit this year. I think one of the toughest things to find is starting pitching, and teams are trying to get more creative with how you cover all of the innings over the course of 162 games. And I think that there's going to be a lot of value in guys that aren't good enough to start, but are better than just throwing one inning, and being able to really kind of mix and match that to take advantage of a lot of the matchup situations that arise without having to, burn your bullpen each and every day.
I feel like my Brewers have put together a rotation of Freddie Peralta, and then the rest is all those guys.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and the Brewers are another org that has done a really good job of that, of piecing together kind of pitching staffs and making the right kind of trades from their surplus to fill kind of gaps and holes throughout the rest of their roster. I think for any kind of team that is unwilling to spend a lot of money on payroll, you have to kind of be constantly churning guys. And as much as it sucks for a fan base when you see a situation where a beloved player gets moved because he's going to hit free agency within the next year, it sucks. But at the same time, it lets you replenish and restock the org and kind of fill the gaps and holes that need to be filled to kind of maintain that consistent competitiveness.
So let's move on to some hitters and the hitting side of things. How when you came into Underdog for the first time, how did you feel about the value of outfielders? Did it feel off, or you know, did you prepare enough to understand the outfield scarcity problem?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things I did before any drafting, was read Chris's stuff on all of the data that he went through. That was really eye opening for me, as just kind of the basic strategy primer for how this all works, before I kind of hopped into the drafts. And I think, the outfield scarcity absolutely makes sense just with how kind of the rosters are constructed. So I've definitely been kind of, trying to make sure I get my outfielders early. And I think one of the biggest adjustments for me coming from a front office back into fantasy baseball is ignoring defense, where how good a player is on defense really matters for their actual baseball value. Where for here it's completely irrelevant. And so for me, it's just been that adjustment of my perception of who I think a player is in my head and really just try to tether it to the offensive side and ignore all the kind of defensive considerations that go into it.
Probably also, I mean, I'm sure runs and RBIs sort of have that same effect on you too, where like as in the front office, you're so isolated on one singular player's performance. If you were in the front office saying like, "Hey GM, like this guy has a lot of RBIs," like you'd be kicked out. Like,
Yeah.
like that's meaningless, but it actually has, that it's a really big part of how players score points on this format. And maybe you feel the same way. I think I get caught up too much sometimes in like the individual, which like is probably not bad process, but can mislead you when, like, oh, like this guy has a different a worse OPS projection than this guy, but also his team is projected to score like 100 more runs. So, just like it's kind of hard to separate the two sometimes.
Yeah. And I think the correlation aspect is very fun because you can build, some really cool stacks and kind of do different things with it. And yes, obviously the runs and RBIs are incredibly context dependent, and kind of targeting good teams is going to lead to more points there. But I'm a big believer in really just kind of targeting the underlying talent, and then when you have players that are similar and think that there's some sort of tie that exists, the tiebreaker is definitely the team aspect.
Are there any outfielders that you feel are being, despite the push-up of the position, do you feel like there's any that are being undervalued in your analysis?
I think it's really hard, especially in this format, to find undervalued outfielders. I think kind of looking through the 200 plus ADP outfielders, there isn't really anyone that stands out. I think kind of Garrett Mitchell and Ceddanne Rafaeli are kind of two upside plays that come with the expectations that they're going to be getting a lot of playing time. And I think that is one of the big things with, there's only 90 starting outfielders. And if everyone's trying to get 6, 7 outfielders on a team, you're pretty much approaching all of those possible outfielders. And so if you miss outfielders early, I think trying to find those guys that are going to get plate appearances late and just rack up points, even if, they're running a 680 OPS, something that kind of allows you to have that depth in the outfield. Those are kind of the sorts of guys that I would target late. I personally have really just prioritized getting outfield out of the way early, just because I think there's so many good infielders with ADPs that are in the 210s or higher, where I don't really feel that way about the outfield group.
So then, I guess moving over then to infielder, who's a surprise first round? I mean, I guess maybe who's going to surprise us this year up at the top there in the infield?
Yeah, I mean, I know he's infield too right now. I don't think it's a surprise, but I wouldn't be shocked if in this format, Bobby Witt ends up as the second highest scorer behind Acuna. I think he's got this really unique combination of power and speed while hitting, at the top of the order that plays very well in this scoring format. So he's someone that I think could really explode. And then kind of looking at the late ADP infielders, I know he's a catcher and it's tough to really bank on catchers in this format when you don't get really a reward for their scarcity. But I'm a big fan of Francisco Alvarez and how he can swing the bat, and wouldn't be shocked if they get him a lot of DH days. And so he's someone that I really like to click late. I know he's starting the season in AAA, but Junior Caminero is another one where I'm just hoping that he's hot by the playoffs and in the lineup there. I really like targeting kind of guys that have power just because I think it gives you a much bigger margin for error at the plate, where the harder you hit the ball, the more you can get away with your mishits. So I've really been trying to, especially late with those infielders that are very grabbable, get the guys that have some pop.
It's an
You
interesting
mentioned
point. Sorry, I was just saying that's an interesting point about like the hard hit. Are you putting any? I mean, I know that like with our format, like we reward power, but you kind of made like a real life baseball case for hitting the ball hard, which obviously, like hitting, no one's going to refute that. When it comes to like bat the ball skills, I think you can. Is there any sort of merit to anybody like the Luis Arias type that? And I mean, there's more than one type of player with his skill set. Any room at all for that in your builds based on the way that we score points in this format?
I definitely think so. I like to have, a mix of the ceiling guys and the accumulators like that, where Arias might not, have the 40-point game with 3 homers, but he's going to have a lot of games where he's, 3 for 4 with 3 singles, 4 for 5 with 2 singles and 2 doubles. And I think that adds up very quickly over the course of a week and over the course of the season. So I definitely think there's space for those guys. And for me, it's really a blend of trying to build teams that have the floor to advance, but also have the ceiling to have those spike weeks in the playoffs. And I think trying to, balance that out as I kind of put together my tiny portfolio of best ball teams, I definitely plan on taking a lot of those accumulators.
I was gonna. You mentioned Bobby Witt. I'd love to get your take on the rest of the team. There is there anybody that you're pairing with him?
Pretty much whenever I can, Vinny, and I'll take Vinny as my only Royal. I think he is probably the most mispriced player in the entire kind of rankings right now of ADP. I think he's got a chance, especially when all that matters in this format is offense. And he has a chance to be one of the best hitters in baseball. And so for me, when you can get a guy that could be a top 25 bat at like ADP 130, for me, that's incredibly attractive. So I'm trying to get Vinny as much as I can. I would be fine with 100% Vinny in my portfolio if that's how it ends up happening, just because I believe in his bat so much.
You are preaching to the choir, my friend. Let me just tell you, I had big time Vinnie Bags last season, which was really upsetting with the shoulder injury, but a little bit of a blessing in disguise because a lot of people that draft on Underdog are just expanding the player card, not seeing big season scores there and discounting him. And I fully agree with you. Like, he's a first baseman. He's, and he hits like a first baseman. It's like a really good first baseman. And he's just lumped in with all these other infielders. And, I'm fully on board with that take. I've got a lot of Vinnie Bags. So that was fun to hear you say.
Yeah, I was not on the Vinny train last year. Happy to get him this year. I guess no concern there then with the shoulder.
No, I think especially it's been a while now and seems to be looking back to normal. I haven't really paid too much attention to the spring training stuff, but he appears to be kind of back on track and back to normal. And when during his rookie year, when a lot of the comparisons of your batted ball data are Freddy Freeman, for me that's always an attractive kind of option in the 14th or 15th round sometimes.
That'll do it.
The hot one there is Nelson Velasquez. Any scouting info on him?
Yeah, he's someone that I kind of plan on staying away from just because I don't really know what his playing time is going to look like. I think he had a very hot kind of season to finish it off last year. and he's got real power. I'm just concerned with kind of the swing and miss and the fact that he doesn't really walk a lot. And yes, power is rewarded in this format. I'm just worried about him performing well enough overall offensively. I think the ceiling is really there with him, but for me, it's a low floor, and that really kind of scares me off of him.
All right, so continuing on the player stuff, we'd be remiss if we didn't get your Ellie De La Cruz opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is one of the most polarizing for a reason because I think his range of outcomes might be wider than anyone else in the player pool, where they're going to play him no matter what. So the good thing is he's going to get plate appearances. And the question is, how good are those plate appearances? Because there's a chance with his power and speed that he ends up as one of the best players in the game. There's also the chance that he strikes out 40% of the time and doesn't really do enough to justify where he's being taken. I think worst case scenario, especially with the defense, he'll probably end up, with a 2-WAR season, but that could be with, a 95 WRC plus, which doesn't really do much for this format. But I also see a scenario where he hits 40 home runs with 40 stolen bases and is a guy that you end up needing. So he's fun, super fun player, and he's the most toolsy guy that exists right now. I'm just same thing. It's for me. I'm scared of the downside at his price, but if he slips, I usually take him if he falls, a round or round and a half below ADP.
Nez, I know you've waffled back and forth on Ellie. Are you in still?
Not really. If he falls, I take him. But I did like capitulate for like a week there. Where I was like, all right, you know what? Let me take some Ellie because if really what the thesis is on Ellie, which like I can't refute, is that he could be the guy you need for 2 weeks, and he has that range of outcomes of being like the sole reason that you advance or the sole reason that you win the contest in a 2-week period. He can do that. So that is hard for me to refute. And I mean, that is, but it's also a little bit of a, I don't want to say like a cop out, but I could also flip that and say he's going to underperform more often than he does perform. There's a greater chance that he is not the guy you need in those 2 weeks. So it's tough, right? It's like you got to pick your battle. So I'm going to be way underweight Ellie, but I'm not going to be a flat zero like I initially promised. But I try to. I've made my case on like various shows, so I don't like to make my whole brand like boo Ellie, but not for me.
Yeah, and he's got like a strange floor in a way, with the fact that if he gets on base, he's gonna get a stolen base. So even if he is relatively underperforming, he does have the ability to score fantasy points if in those ways too.
And he can steal a lot of bases, right? Like that's like if it's, but he has to, he's got to get on base first, and he has some concerns, but I mean, the ceiling is clearly there.
The plate appearances probably won't go away. Like I know. The claim that he's maybe going to be in AAA, it doesn't seem to be the way that their season is shaking out already with Marte, right?
Yeah. Now that Noel B's suspended, there's no way that he's losing playing time at this point.
The other exciting young guy that is sort of not as inflammatory as Ellie De La Cruz, Royce Lewis, Jarod.
I'm in on Royce Lewis. I think he is a special talent, and he just had some real awful injury luck the past few years. I think his price right now is fair. Definitely accounts for that upside with the injury risk. I'm someone who's much less concerned with hitter injury risk than pitcher injury risk. So I'm someone a lot more willing to take, Lewis and Buxton and guys like that. So I think Lewis is one of those guys that he's fast and he hits the ball hard, which for this points format that rewards extra base hits and stolen bases, that's the combo you need, and not a lot of guys have it. And kind of this whole game theory of we've talked about with Ellie of balancing, the risk and what the median projection looks like versus the floor and the ceiling, and how you want to kind of build your portfolio and build kind of that 20 round roster each time. I think there's some really fun levers to pull there, especially with guys that have these price discrepancies from the raw projections, just with injury history, the chance that they actually hit their ceiling. So it's a fun kind of game to play, and really kind of trying to figure out which of these young guys is going to be the one that you need.
I mean, transitioning to other young guys, the top three prospects. I'll let you take what you want with Wyatt Langford, Jackson Churio, and Jackson Holiday.
Yeah, and I think don't forget that Evan Carter is technically still a rookie too, which makes it even more fun, because I think him and Langford have a chance to really be special. It sucks that the community is really sharp on it and all over it, and ADPs for them have just been climbing and climbing. But Wyatt already has plus power, and Evan Carter has one of the best eyes in baseball and really good hand-eye coordination with power. And so I think he's going to be just a total complete hitter that really does well in this format while stealing some bases too. And then I think Churio is one that I'm taking kind of when I have the chance. But he's the one that I think I'm the most scared of the prospects, just because his profile does have, a little bit more swing and miss to it, a little bit more volatility. And then Jackson he's special. He's someone I've had a chance to watch play in person, and it's clear when he's on the field that he is different. And that was when he was surrounded by people 3-4 years older than him. I think he's added a lot of strength this offseason, because my one concern, and it wasn't even a concern, it was he's only 19 years old and the power isn't there yet, but it will be. And now it's just going to keep climbing as he continues to develop, continues to age, and his plate discipline and hand-eye is so special. So I think if he starts hitting for power this year, he could put on a show as a rookie. So I'm excited, I think, the most to see what Jackson does, especially at such a young age. And I think it's a fun time when you have a lot of exciting prospects that are going to be on opening day rosters. I think that's really good for the game. The CBA change that incentivizes you to put your best rookie on the roster at the start, I think it makes it better for everybody.
100%. 100%. I'm with you on Jackson. I feel like I'm probably 1 year away from like being overweight in my portfolio. I'm with you. Like, I'm worried about the power playing at the major league level, and will he increase his walks as well? He doesn't really walk a lot currently, so as far as like the profile goes, it's not someone that I really gravitate towards, especially being a rookie. On top of that, obviously, I mean, like, he's a prospect and he has this immense ceiling, but I think I'm like 1 year away from really unloading the clip on him in drafts.
Back to real baseball, Jarod. When it comes to like scouting and even the tech analysis and stuff, are there people like separated between these are the guys looking at pitching, or these are the people looking at pitching, these are the people looking at hitting? Obviously, as an intern, you probably got to schlep whatever you had to schlep, but how is that broken up within the team?
Yeah, so that's another thing that, like, as kind of a cop out answer it is to say, it varies significantly from team to team, and I think that's where, I know the way that Tampa has it structured, they have very specified analyst roles where, they have one analyst who's primarily only looking at batted ball data, another who's, only looking at pitch data. Then they have one who's only looking at hitter biomechanic data, and then another who's only looking at pitcher biomechanic data. And you have this very kind of hyper specialized group of analysts that are obviously collaborating and communicating with one another, but the data that they're looking at on a day-to-day basis is hyper specialized. And then there's other orgs that I know of where they have, two player development analysts that are responsible for all of the pitching and all of the hitting data together at the minor league level. So it really does kind of vary, and the resources that teams are willing to spend there really will dictate kind of what the structure of the front office looks like. But the way that the data is analyzed, shared, distributed, communicated, it really does differ greatly from team to team.
Nez, did you have any other specific players on your list, your plate, that you wanted to dish out?
No, I think we covered a lot of like the polarizing players in the community. We got some pretty good insight, on those guys. So nothing else to prod Jarod over. This is a fun conversation.
Yeah, and we got the Vinnie P. The should be drafting Vinnie P. Notes. So Jarod, going forward, now that you're a little bit free to play fantasy baseball, it sounded like you're interested in the daily format too.
Yeah, I'm super excited for the dailies. I love kind of that stacking and correlation aspect that comes into it. And just with kind of how the slates are structured, there's a lot of opportunity to get low owned players with projections that are very similar to guys that are getting taken every time. I know for football, John has always talked about the scroll the F down thesis. And as someone who kind of took a quick peek at some NFL BR data, it really is true. Just kind of how quickly ownership falls off a curve toward the end of drafts. And so for me, I'm really excited to make a bunch of weird combos that hopefully Numi doesn't cancel, and really kind of get exploitative with kind of taking advantage of different matchups that I like, different kind of lineup combos that I like, especially if you draft before lineups come out and try, project where those guys are going to hit in the order that day against specific pitchers, or, banking on one team and then just kind of building different combos of the, top 6 guys in that lineup. I still don't know what I'm going to do yet. I think it's going to be a really fun kind of process to experiment with and see how it all turns out.
I think Numi loves baseball season, or will love baseball season, because there's really not anything to cancel. Like everything goes with baseball. So as long as you're not selecting players that are already marked out, then it's free reign. That's what makes it so fun. It is the scroll the F down sport. Like, truly. I mean, it really is.
And it's been the same way in golf. I've max entered pretty much every slate recently, and I haven't had a single golf draft canceled.
Yep.
Just because the projection margins are so thin that ADP doesn't really matter. And if you want to get unique, you can get unique without sacrificing a ton of projected points.
Exactly.
All right. Anything we missed that we didn't ask you, Jarod, that you had thought you'd have planned, or you plan to let us know?
No, I mean, I think you guys have touched on everything. I think one thing I am kind of curious, because you guys have had, a lot of experience with Underdog in this format, who are kind of, if you're happy to share, I know I've seen a little bit of it in Discord and kind of on the various shows, but who are kind of your biggest flag plants this season?
So pitcher is Shota Imanaga. I just think the I don't think people know what he's going to be, and so I similar to Ellie, but a lot later. I think he has a big range of outcomes in terms of how he establishes himself in the majors.
I like that call, Sheep. I've been enjoying it more and more as I learn more about Shota and like seeing what some of his stuff looks like. It's got me excited for him and his debut. For me, my biggest stand is I've got two pretty big stands, and it's two infielders, Josh Naylor and Key Brian Hayes. I've got 40% of both of those guys on in my portfolio, and I was never this concentrated in the past for any sort of best ball tournament, but where their prices are and what I think their range of outcomes are, I make them a part of literally almost half of my teams, and it feels good. I really like having both of those guys on there. So we'll see how it pans out. But those are like my two big flag plans, Naylor and Hayes for sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
all three of those guys are guys that I've actually been trying to get over the field on. I'm a big fan of Shota. I think it'll translate very well to Major League Baseball. So I'm excited to kind of see that. And I think he's one of my favorite pitchers in that kind of like 120 to 140 ADP range, where you feel like there's some upside there without having to waste a lot of that early draft capital.
the hitter that he is kind of expensive, but Michael Harris has been my like surprising like upside pick. I think it it's hard to talk about upside in that range, but I just see looking at his data, I see pre-breakout Christian Yelich there, with sort of not a fly ball approach, but he just hits the ball really hard. And I think just on that team, I don't know, I want to be ahead of the season where he is MVP.
It's funny, if defense mattered, his ADP would be probably 3 rounds higher than it is already too, just because he's so good in center field.
Yeah, and maybe I'm overrating the upside there, but he's just so young that I've been. It feels more. It's like going there and you want to take the young guy, and you're looking at Nolan Jones or him. Like it's easier for me to take Harris, although I am taking both.
And then you get the runs and RBIs from him being with the Braves too, which definitely helps the stock a lot.
And I think he's somebody that is like you can look kind of like beyond the projection on, because of the plate appearance projection on him is, I would imagine, baking in a lower spot in the order. That's like one of the biggest edges in projections is, kind of projecting your own playing time and your own plate appearances. And if he finds himself more often than not, at the top half of that order, then projections are likely incorrect on what the playing time looks like for him, and that can equate to a big dividends for best ball.
Yeah, it's hard to like. I'm not as overweight as Shota just because I don't want to be also out on Randy Rosarena and Christian Yelich and the infielders there.
Yeah, it makes sense.
All right, so here we are. We have had a wonderful conversation here with Jarod. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Um, thank you guys for watching. So for Nez and Jarod and myself, have good drafts.